So we're going to continue with a description of the sequence of events that occurred on the accident flight for Kobe Bryant. There's a lot, if you look on YouTube, there's a lot of good simulations that basically start, and they're all computer simulations that start essentially from the time they depart the airport at John Wayne Airport at Santa Ana and continue on through the entire flight right up to the time that the accident occurred. And many of those simulations are very high quality. And in addition to the computer simulation, they've added actual ATC communications in essentially real time. And they also add a lot more detail than what I'm going to cover here. I'm going to cover just a fairly quick sequence of the events of the flight. Now I'm going to be using a helicopter route chart. The advantage of a helicopter route chart, what a helicopter route chart is these are used by helicopter pilots in areas of heavily congested airspace along major cities in the U.S. There's about 8 or 9 available, not only Los Angeles, but there's route charts available for Dallas and Houston, Chicago, Detroit, D.C., Boston. I'm probably leaving off 1 or 2 additional ones, but there's several route charts available for large cities throughout the United States. The advantage of using the route chart is it's much more simplified than a sectional chart. A sectional chart's really a little bit too busy for what the needs of a helicopter pilot. And most of the routes that are on these charts are clearly identified, and they typically follow freeways. And they're easily identified in dark blue. There's some nice features on the charts in that they'll put major landmarks are clearly identified on the chart, and many of those landmarks are used as reporting points for communications with ATC. There's some additional features. A lot of times they'll put the frequency of the upcoming, the next airspace that you've got to transition through is printed right on the chart. And there's a text section that actually covers some more specific instructions on how to fly many of these transitions and routes. A lot of them may have, for instance, altitude restrictions. You may have to stay below a certain altitude or above a certain altitude. The shoreline transition, give an example in Los Angeles, the shoreline transition that transitions along the shoreline just outside of LAX, just to the west of LAX, has to be flown at less than 150 feet in altitude and within a quarter mile of the shore. And there are other ones that have routes that have altitude restrictions on. You can have to be above a certain altitude as well. So now we're going to pick up the flight. Basically, they departed out of John Wayne Airport and transitioned to the north along the 5 or along the Santa Ana Freeway, and we're going to pick it up there. So if you look on the chart here, here's the 5. And so they were continuing transitioning northbound along the Santa Ana Freeway, or the 5. This is downtown Los Angeles. Staples Center would be in here. Here's City Hall. Here's Dodger Stadium. So anyway, they continued northbound along the 5. When they arrived here at Glendale, they ended up having to hold for about 15 minutes and circle here. And the reason for the hold, which we'll talk more extensively about here in a minute, but the short reason for the hold was that there was IFR traffic that was operating within Burbank Airport, Bob Hope Airport here at Burbank. You'll notice this circle here outlines the airspace for Bob Hope Airport. And at that time when they arrived, there was IFR traffic that was operating within the airspace here at Burbank. And he wanted to transition through under special VFR clearance. The field is actually under IFR conditions at that time. They won't allow a special VFR transition until the IFR traffic that's operating within the airspace has either landed or they've actually are outbound and outside of the airspace. So that resulted in about 15 minutes of holding here over Glendale. Eventually the IFR traffic cleared and he was allowed to transition via special VFR along the 5 here northbound to pick up and intercept the 118. 118 runs east-west here along top here. And so he proceeded along the 5 and then picked up the 118. At about the time he arrived at the 118, the controller for Burbank actually handed him off to the controller here at Van Nuys. He continued westbound along the 118 here, and about the time he was exiting the airspace here, the controller actually asked him did he want to continue flight following with SoCal approach, And he did that, so he established communications with SoCal Approach at that point, and then continued southwest bound. He ended up intercepting the Ventura Freeway, the 101 here, in the neighborhood of the Topanga Canyon Boulevard here. And he continued westbound along the 101 at cruise speed, and we'll talk more about the fact that he was at cruise speed a bit here in just a bit as well. But I'd like to back out and show you guys something. This whole area in through here is basically a big flat valley up in here. And the ground elevation in this region is about 800 feet. If you look here at Bob Hope Airport, the runways are at an elevation of 778 feet. And over here at Ventura, the field elevation is 802 feet. So in this area here, we're looking at a ground elevation of about 800 feet. As you continue along the Ventura Freeway, or the 101, westbound, you encounter rising terrain, not only on both sides of the highway, but the highway itself actually begins to climb in altitude. So as he proceeded along the 101, when he arrived about in this area here, he notified SoCal Approach that he was going to initiate a climb through 4,000 feet to get on top of the cloud layers. At that time, SoCal Approach actually ask him to ident. And what that means is you actually go to your transponder and you press a button on the front of the transponder. Transponders are typically located in the center console of the aircraft. So you go to your transponder, you press the ident button, and that makes you show up more prominently on the controller's radar screen in case there's several aircraft operating in that same area. That way it's easy for you show up more prominently. It's easier for the controller to identify the aircraft that he's actually talking to. So when he arrived about this area, he initiated that climb. At the time the climb started, he, within relatively short order, developed a left-hand turn. The reason I mentioned the fact that the controller had him ident, and it's not the controller, it's nothing to do with the controller, but that's frequently done, that they may ask you to ident. That was also cited by the NTSB as a possible issue that could cause some distraction at that time. But anyway, nonetheless, he started the climb here, had informed SoCal he was going to climb to 4,000 feet to get above the cloud layers. When his climb continued through about 2,300 feet and with a bit of a left-hand turn, unfortunately that was about the highest altitude that he got to was 2,300 feet. And the cloud layers at that time, the tops of the clouds were actually at 2,400 feet. Had he climbed a mere 100 feet further, he would have broken out of on top, and likely the accident would not have occurred. Unfortunately, his climb only continued through about 2,300. And if you're in an aircraft and you're in a turn like that, and you don't provide some aft pressure on the stick or the wheel, if it's an airplane or helicopter, then what happens is that turn will tend to intensify. As a turn intensifies, then the descent intensifies, and you can develop a spiraling, very rapid descent, and ultimately that's essentially what happened. And so he developed a turning left, rapid descent, and it ended up impacting some high terrain here just outside of Calabasas.